The whole thing begins immediately at a hospital. A girl named Shiki has been hurt and is unconscious due to an accident. The doctors conduct an emergency surgery on Shiki and manage to keep her alive. Meanwhile, her close friend Mikiya is a kind and compassionate man, and he spends each night looking after her at the hospital. While Shiki goes into a coma for the next 2 years, Mikiya visits her every single day with flowers. After 2 years, Shiki finally wakes up, but she's still physically weak. When she wakes up, she starts seeing strange lines in all objects. Even the doctors and nurses seem to have these same strange lines. Their arms also seem to be chopped and falling apart. Of course, the whole thing is so traumatic to Shiki and she is unable to bear it, so she pierces her own eyes with her fingers. Meanwhile, Mikiya starts working at a detective agency called the Hollow Shrine. The Hollow Shrine is run by a woman called Toko, who is actually a powerful sorceress, and this agency is actually used to solve supernatural cases. Mikiya tells Toko about Shiki's condition, so Toko pretends to be a therapist and goes to consult Shiki. Shiki is unwilling to talk to her properly, so Toko reveals that she's a sorceress and she can actually help her more than the doctors. Toko knows that Shiki is a lonely person, but she doesn't have to stay that way. Then Toko goes back to the detective agency and tells Mikiya that Shiki will be fine in a while. That night, a strange blue spirit reveals itself and enters Shiki's body. The next morning, she decides that she doesn't want to stay lonely. She accepts her therapy sessions with Toko. One day, Shiki asks Toko for a pair of scissors to cut her hair, but Toko can't give it to her because of Shiki's previous incident when she hurt her own eyes. Over time, Shiki gets better, and the doctors say that she can leave soon. However, Shiki is struggling with her strange powers when she sees those lines cutting through everything. She does not want to live and see those things every day, so she prepares to completely destroy her eyes. However, Toko arrives just in time and stops her. Toko says what Shiki has is actually a power called the Mystic Eyes of Death Perception. These mystic eyes would be a valuable tool in defeating supernatural beings. She can see the death lines of other living beings and even touch them and change them. Toko says that even if Shiki were to completely remove her eyes, the power of the mystic eyes would still stay with her. Instead of fighting it, she offers to teach her how to use the powers of her new eyes. Later that night, Shiki is sleeping when suddenly a strange ghoul tries to choke her. Shiki is helpless to do anything. Despite being at such a disadvantage, she fights back. The ghoul comes after her, so Shiki grabs him and jumps out of the window. Toko also arrives as a backup. The ghoul continues coming after them, so Toko uses her cigarettes to make runes in the air which burns the ghoul. However, it is not effective as technically the ghoul is already dead, so you can't kill it. But Shiki ain't having none of those excuses. She removes her eye patch and fights the ghoul hand to hand. She does a pretty damn good job too. To help her, Toko gives her a knife which she uses to cut her hair. Then she cuts down the ghoul's arm and neck. However, a blue spirit releases from the ghoul and enters her body instead. But Shiki takes control of her body and stabs herself, removing the spirit away from herself. Then Shiki asks Toko to help her use the Mystic Eyes of Death Perception. In return, she will help out in Toko's Hollow Shrine Detective Agency. Then she collapses to the ground. Sometime later, Mikiya comes to visit her. Shiki recognizes him as the one who had been waiting by her side for the past 2 years. Mikiya says that she's ready to leave the hospital. Movie 3. Remaining Sense of Pain. Sometime later, a group of gangsters molest a teenage girl named Fujino in an abandoned bar. Despite being in such a traumatic experience, Fujino does not react and she seems numb to everything. The men get bored, so one of them pulls out a knife at her stomach. Later that night, Mikiya finds Fujino clutching her stomach as if she is hurt, so he takes her back to his apartment and takes care of her. The next morning, she leaves without saying anything as if it's a one-night stand. In the news, we can hear that a group of gangsters were killed in an abandoned bar. Their bodies were completely twisted, and their limbs were ripped apart in disturbing and unnatural ways. On to the Hollow Shrine Detective Agency. Shiki is now working full-time for Toko. They have recently received a request from a mysterious client to investigate the murders of the gangsters in the abandoned bar last night. The murder suspect is none other than the molested Fujino. Toko puts Shiki in charge of finding and stopping her. Meanwhile, Fujino is actually with another of the gangsters, and she uses some strange powers of hers to torture him. She seems to be looking for one of the gangsters named Keita. It seems Fujino is taking revenge on Keita and the other gangsters, so Keita has gone into hiding. That night, Fujino tortures another one of the gangsters using her telekinetic psychic powers. All the while, she's clutching her stomach. The man's legs bend in disturbing positions, and she even breaks his entire body. Just then, Shiki arrives at the scene. Fujino uses her powers on Shiki, but Shiki uses her own powers to hold the attack back. Shiki gets a sudden change of heart and leaves Fujino for now. Fujino thinks back to her past. The truth is, she's unable to feel any pain. When she was a child, she accidentally cut her fingers, but she did not feel that either. But in the present, Fujino is suddenly feeling a pain in her stomach. She believes that it started because Keita and his friend stabbed her when they molested her. So she's now hunting him down to understand more of this pain that she's suddenly starting to feel. She even gets Keita's number and calls him, saying she wants to find him because she now feels pain and she feels alive. But as it turns out, Mikiya is there with Keita and he hears everything that Fujino says. Keita reveals that he and his gang have actually been abusing Fujino for over 6 months. She always used to lie still without reacting, like a mindless doll. But in their last encounter, one of the men stabbed her in the stomach with a knife. Ever since then, Fujino has been feeling pain and coming after the gangsters. Mikiya is disgusted by Keita, but he still brings him back to the detective agency to protect him from Fujino. He recalls the night he met Fujino and how she was holding her stomach as if she was in pain. However, Shiki says that when she fought Fujino, she did not see any wounds in her stomach, which is quite bizarre. But she confirms that Fujino really is in a lot of pain right now. Toko believes that this pain triggered her towards revenge. Mikiya does not believe that Fujino could be a stone-cold killer, so he goes to Fujino's village to investigate her past. That night, Fujino is walking down the road when a car almost hits her. The next day, we find out that she survived the accident, but she killed the driver by twisting off his head. Since this was not related to her revenge and this was just a random killing, Shiki and Toko decide that Fujino must be stopped. Elsewhere, Fujino starts getting flashbacks of her school days. It turns out she's actually Mikiya's junior, and they actually met. Fujino remembers him even though he does not. Fujino had been injured, so Mikiya helped her, even though she was not feeling any pain. That night, Mikiya comes back to the Hollow Shrines after conducting his investigation. Turns out Fujino had been able to feel pain when she was very young, but her father had been concerned over her psychic powers, so he had artificially turned off her sensitivity in order to stop her from using her powers. However, after the incident with Keita and the other gangsters, her sensitivity to pain and her powers seemed to have turned back on. As for the stabbing in her stomach, she had killed the gangsters before she had been actually stabbed. The pain she's feeling is actually from a ruptured appendix that was never treated. Meanwhile, Shiki has found Fujino walking alone on a bridge. Shiki claims that Fujino has now become a murderer and is no longer an avenger. They get into a fight where Fujino tries to use her telekinetic powers on Shiki, who uses her fighting skills to avoid every attack. Their battle goes in the interior of the bridge. There, Fujino manages to destroy Shiki's arm, but Shiki's willpower is way too strong for her. She just ties her arm and continues fighting. Meanwhile, Toko says that Fujino's appendix has been damaged for a long time because she was not feeling any pain before. Now it's way serious and she will die soon. Also, the mysterious client who put them on this case is actually Fujino's father, and he wants her dead because of how dangerous she is. Back to the bridge. Fujino has used her power so much on Shiki that she can now see it with her mystic eyes of death perception. With this information, she cuts away Fujino's psychic powers every time. Then she pins her to the ground and raises her knife. As a final act of desperation, Fujino destroys the whole bridge with her powers, and she gets even more hurt in the process. Shiki comes to her and stabs her. Later, Mikiya and Toko arrive at the scene. Shiki tells them that she did not kill Fujino because in the end, her sensitivity to pain disappeared again, so she might not go on another killing spree because she's no longer in pain. So, Shiki just removed Fujino's ruptured appendix. If they hurry, they can still save her. So Mikiya quickly calls the hospital. Then Shiki asks for a metal arm to replace her damaged arm, which Toko agrees to. Fujino is taken to a hospital and Mikiya and Shiki get to talking. He says that Fujino is just a normal girl who suffered through too much. She will learn to understand her mistakes, but Shiki is still a little skeptical and wary. But she also smiles, and Mikiya says that this is the first time she genuinely smiled at him since she woke up. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on the notification, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.